I'm sorry, Sam. I got to unmute you. That I had.
There we go. Did it on my screen.
All right.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Bonsai Society of Southwest Florida, April 2021. And today we're having a special invitation to Mr. Mike Lane, who's going to speak to us about Buttonwoods. So I first of all, I just want to say thanks, Mike. And we are very fortunate to have a close association with Mike. And having him in our proximity to our club, it's been a great learning experience for us. So Mike, it's all yours, buddy.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you having me today, as you have in the past. You know, as Sam was saying, I do have a close relationship with the Fort Myers Club. They probably hosted me more than anybody over the course of my bonsai career. And today we're going to be talking about something that I'm very, very passionate about, arguably my favorite tree, the buttonwood. We'll get into kind of the history, why it means so much to me. But it really is, in my opinion, the best material that Florida has to offer. So if you guys don't have any questions now, I'll go ahead and just start sharing the PowerPoint, and then I'll kind of discuss all that as we go in there. I do want to add before I get fully into it that I did recently have an article published on Buttonwood in Bonsai Focus, and a lot of that is going to kind of reiterate what we're talking about today. So if you guys did want to have a follow-up to the program, you could buy just that issue and kind of have a little bit of the program right there. So I'll go ahead and get started. Hang on. Oops. Hang on. Do this. Share screen. Okay. So this is our first slide is just an iconic buttonwood by Nacho Marin. Nacho Marin is an artist down in Venezuela that I believe the club has hosted. And he's fantastic with buttonwoods, fantastic with conifers even. He's just a fantastic artist overall. So just thought this was a very good standard to start with to kind of get our eyes kind of around the idea of what we're looking to achieve with buttonwood. Hang on, just got to get my computer to respond. Okay. So buttonwoods are also known by the botanical name Conocarpus erectus. They are a mangrove shrub that grows along coastlines in tropical and subtropical regions. Now, when people refer to them as mangroves, there's still a lot of debate on whether they're a true mangrove. Most scientists don't consider them a true mangrove. However, they are included in what's called the Florida Mengal. So the Mengal, anytime you hear that term Mengal, that just refers to an area's mangrove ecosystem. So if we go to Indonesia, they will have a different Mengal than here in Florida. They are naturalized in Florida, and they're also very common throughout the Caribbean, as well as Central and South America. So it is important to remember that although we think of buttonwood as a Florida native, it is only naturalized here. Florida is the northernmost part of a buttonwoods range. So that's why they are so protected here. And that's also why you will not see buttonwoods growing much further north than Tampa Bay. So you go much further north than that, you just won't see them growing. They can't handle the winters. So if you go further south down into the Caribbean, Puerto Rico, the Bahamas, Haiti, and the Dominican, you'll start to see really, really crazy buttonwoods that, thrive year round. So they really do, they are true tropicals, and they prefer true tropical climate. Buttonwoods are one of the 4 species that make up the Florida Mengal. The other 3 are the red mangrove, the black mangrove, and the white mangrove. The red mangrove grows directly in the water. So when we're out looking for buttonwoods, or when you actually are out in the mangrove, you'll be able to kind of see how things grow and what tree does what for that ecosystem. And the red mangrove is the one that we always see with the prop roots that's growing directly in the water, that is submerged 90% of the time. So those are red mangroves. Usually those are no good for bonsai. I haven't seen anybody really take one further than, primary branching. The next one in the mangrove, as you are working your way out of the water, would be the black mangrove and then the white mangrove. Black mangroves have been used with great difficulty in bonsai, but it's not an easy tree to use. And white mangroves we've tried as well, and they're just not they don't really work with the grower very well. But you'll see black mangroves growing with those tubes that come out of the ground. Those are called nematophores. And so that's kind of their key trait. And a white mangrove looks very, very similar to a buttonwood, just with a rounder leaf, and it grows more towards the water. Now, buttonwoods, finally, those are the ones that you'll see on slightly drier land. So as you're working your way up on these barrier islands, once you finally get to the drier land where you can actually walk around and not have your feet wet, that's where you'll actually see buttonwoods. It's important that I denote this because as we go into the horticulture, we're going to talk a lot about watering buttonwoods. Buttonwoods, they lack a showy bloom. They're definitely not grown for their flowers. All you get is a small little puffball that arranges on a small stem. And then that breaks into a seed-like pod that they call the button. So this is the Grand Champion Key West buttonwood. This is what they look like in nature once they achieve that very large ancient size. Now, as we get further into this, we'll see some buttonwoods that are smaller and not as big in circumference, but are actually older than this tree. And that's going to be something that I really want to drive home today, is that there are different rates of growth for trees depending on the environment. So a tree growing in a park somewhere that's taken care of, that's watered and fertilized appropriately, is going to grow much, much faster in a shorter period of time than a tree that's getting beat up every single year that may not achieve that size ever in its lifetime. So this tree, as big and as wild as it looks, has actually led a really, really nice, cushy life. This is another one. This one's arguably had a rougher life. This is one of the champions in Jamaica. So you can see that twisting, gnarled deadwood is the character of the buttonwoods. That's really what we're after. And now this is what, more often than not, when we're walking around and you're looking for true Yamadori, this is really what you see. So oftentimes it's not every buttonwood makes a good bonsai. Oftentimes you go and you look for buttonwoods and you find a lot of trees that have lived really, really good lives. And so those trees aren't going to really have too much interest, and they're not worth taking out of the ecosystem. Now, trees that have lived a rough life, that have struggled, you'll occasionally find those in areas where maybe they don't have a lot of soil. So in our area, the best buttonwoods have always been found in the Keys or on Caprock Islands, where they live in small little pockets of soil and they get a lot of tidal changes and they get a lot of storm changes. So areas that are in the direct path of typhoons often have some of the best buttonwoods. But areas, again, that aren't going to have the best buttonwoods are going to be parks. You know, digging one out of your yard that's been a landscape tree for years and years, while it can still make a good bonsai, it's never going to be as good as a true collected piece. And we'll talk about that as we get more into it, why collected material is so valued. So here we go, another look at it. When you do kind of find this Shangri-La of buttonwoods, oftentimes it just looks like a forest of dead trees. So you'll usually see these deadwood spires just jutting out in all directions. And it is a beautiful sight for any Florida bonsai grower. Now, with that said, buttonwoods are protected and so can only be collected legally under specific circumstances. In the times that we've been able to collect buttonwoods, it's usually that a property is going to be developed anyway, the buttonwoods are coming out, or we import them from areas that unfortunately have less restriction, like Puerto Rico. So people collect them down there and ship them here. And so that's how a lot of these come into our possession. Now, I have collected buttonwoods on my own. I will just admit it. And the way I like to teach that is I'm not saying go out and collect a bunch of trees, but anytime we're collecting from the natural environment, your job is to protect the environment first and foremost. So I never go out and take more than 1 or 2 trees, if any. And I maybe go out once every 4 to 5 years. And that's it. Because people have in the past, in places like Japan, in other areas where trees have gained massive popularity, they have stripped the land of collected material. So when you go to Japan, you don't see these wild junipers like you did, and you're not allowed to collect in Japan anymore. It's illegal. You can't collect anywhere in Japan. So you do need to be responsible, because as business, starts dipping its hand into this hobby, people are going to want more and more buttonwoods. People are going to want more and more trees, and it's up to us to be responsible and not take too many. So here's another look at them, a close-up of some cool ones I found. Now, this is a spot that you guys can go to as well. I don't collect here. This is off of Winkler Road in Fort Myers. There's a little preserve at the end. And anytime it's dry, in the dry season, you guys can walk back there and you'll really see some cool, old, gnarly trees. That's where I found a lot of these cool ones sitting out there. But it's not everywhere that I find this material. It's not like I can take a walk anywhere in Florida and find cool deadwood ones. It really is kind of an area specific thing.
The park you just referred to, do they allow digging?
They do not. No, I never dig there. I would never dig there. So it's just something that I would recommend you guys going to see, just to kind of get your eyes around how they grow. When they are in a rough environment, it's very cool to see how they grow. Because oftentimes some of the coolest buttonwoods that I have in my collection are ones that you would have never even seen. You would have been walking on top of them. And because they've been laid down by the storm so many times, they're laying flat with all these cool angle changes, and they're just waiting for a creative bonsai guy to lift them up and really show a lot of that deadwood. So oftentimes it's just cool to see how they grow. Even if you're not going to dig them, it's cool to just go out there and see it.
Mike,
Yeah,
may I break in here? We've got everybody muted, but you did say you wanted questions during the program.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I should suggest to people, if you press your space bar, you can talk while the space bar is down.
Yeah, so again, just hold down the space bar and you guys can ask your questions, okay? So again, this was one that Eric found on one of his travels. We are always sending each other cool pictures if we see something like this, just because it is useful as a grower to study the deadwood. An interesting thing about deadwood on collected trees is that one of the reasons they're so valuable is a true collected tree grew very, very slowly. And so the deadwood that's on that tree, on the ones that we really want, might have taken 50 to 100 years to create. Now, why that's important is A, we cannot recreate that in our lifetime. We can't do it. The other thing is that when something grows slowly, it creates a tighter grain on the wood. So that wood becomes much more dense. And so if it's laying a small layer every year, as opposed to a fat, coarse layer, then after 100 years, you're going to have a piece of wood that's very, very dense and very, very insect resistant, and it's going to last a long, long time. So in Japan, they have a saying that's 1 year to grow, 1 year to rot on junipers. So if you grew a branch for 1 year and you turn that into a gin, in theory, it's only going to last 1 year. So if we're investing in nice material, that's why collected material is so prized, and why it fetches such outrageous prices, is because you can't recreate it. There's no way. There's no trick to create that wood in any faster amount of time.
Is there a process involved in importing from Puerto Rico?
There is. So it involves a phyto. They do have to come in bare root, and so it is risky. It's not without risk. Getting them from Puerto Rico, you are assuming all the risk, because they have to strip all the soil out of that tree's roots and wrap it in plastic and then ship it here for a few days. So there are losses. So it's not something I'd say go willy-nilly, but occasionally you can get them on bonsai auctions. And those guys have good reputations. There's a guy on there, Sam Bonsai, that occasionally posts some really, really great buttonwoods from Puerto Rico. And Eric has a few really good ones left. So check out there too, if you're interested in a nice collected one. So one more look at a large tree with deadwood on it, one that's lived a hard life. Now, obviously, I would never recommend digging anything that big. Aside from it being kind of disrespectful to such an old tree, you'd kill yourself. And I just think that, leave it be. If you come across an old giant like that, an old ancient guy, just leave it for everybody to enjoy. That's my theory. Buttonwoods have a special place in Florida bonsai. They are considered by many to be the premier Yamadori material found in the state. So if you're talking about world-class bonsai, so you're trying to compete with the bonsai all around the world, then I would say personally, the best material to do that with is the buttonwood. It's our best collected material. They're the trees that tend to show the most age. Also, I like cypress. Cypress can really, as they get old, they show a lot of age too, but I still prefer buttonwood. I think that's the material that creates the most interesting and unique shapes that you can't recreate. You can't recreate those shapes with wire or the unpredictability of the design. They're prized for their weather trunks and exaggerated live veins. Buttonwoods can often be found in all manners of shapes, often with many twists, turns, and deadwood. So I used to try to take collected buttonwoods and turn them into what my mind wanted them to be. Like I would kind of reduce a lot of the deadwood. And in recent years, what I've really fallen in love with is kind of letting them be what they were, like letting the coolest part that nature shaped, I'll kind of hone in on that, even if it has some flaws on our understanding of bonsai. I'll leave a lot of that stuff just because of the uniqueness of the shape. And it's almost like I'm just collecting nature-built sculptures, is how I look at it. And I'll wire in some cool branches and I'll really just highlight what nature already did. That's my approach to collected material. The most prized Yamadori are being those exhibiting character that would be impossible to achieve in our lifetime. Trees growing in ideal areas will live boring, uninteresting lives, and thus will often make less interesting subjects for bonsai. That's not just with buttonwoods, that's with everything. We don't want to hear the story of somebody that's, never had anything happen to them. That's not an interesting life story. You want to hear a dynamic life story where there was struggle and you overcame that, and there's a lot of in and outs. Even with people, we want to hear that. We want to hear a dynamic life story. So it's the same with trees. You don't want a tree that's just lived the perfect life and, it just doesn't have a lot of interest to it. So trees growing, on the other hand, trees that have grown slowly with great hardship produce the best candidates for training. So we're looking for those survivors. And if you want to look at it another poetic way, think of it as you're taking that survivor and hopefully providing it a much better life than it was living before. Aside from the storm-battered and rugged trunks, the tree branches well and its leaves readily reduce in size to work with even shohin designs. So buttonwood can work, you can make big buttonwood trees, very, very large buttonwood trees, but you can also make very, very small shohin trees. The leaves reduce down very, very well. And if you guys get into more advanced refinement, kind of fertilization and things like that, you can get the leaves down maybe dime sized, maybe quarter sized at the biggest. So very, very useful for bonsai. There are two recognized varieties that exist. Conocarpus erectus erectus, that's the green buttonwood, and also the silver buttonwood, Conocarpus erectus cerisus. So there is also one more that I didn't put on here that's towards the end, but I want to touch on it. There's the card sound buttonwood, which is also known as the narrow leaf buttonwood. Now, the reason I didn't include that in the species is that there's a lot of debate on whether that is a cultivar, a species, or what it is. So not a lot of research has been done on buttonwood to kind of delineate these things. The last thing, this is important as well, is collected buttonwood come in a variety of slightly different foliage, including almost round-shaped leaves to pointed and spear-like. Now, it's not just the leaves that are different on collected trees. We're dealing with individuals. So these aren't cutting grown trees where the genetics are the same over and over and over again. Every single collected tree you're going to grab or a collected buttonwood is going to have different growth habits. So you might find some that are frustrating to grow and that don't bud back well and that don't have a great leaf. Or you might find some that are, it's easy. You're just pruning them and they're budding back everywhere you need them to be. So there is a big mix in the variety of how they'll grow and the foliage that you'll see on them. This is a up close look of the silver buttonwood, also with the fruit, the button-like fruit. Okay. So this is the first buttonwood that I ever saw. This was the one that was out at Eric's when I first met him. So I got into bonsai. Somebody gave me a small juniper, and you know, I had known about bonsai for a long time and never thought to get involved in it. And so I did my research, and I found out that Eric Weiger was right out in North Fort Myers. So I didn't think I was gonna, you know, dedicate my life to this. I just wanted to go check it out and get a cheap tree that I could enjoy at home. And I went out there on my birthday, and I remember seeing this tree in person. And it really was, I'm not even lying to you, it was a switch that turned, and I looked at that and I just said, this is what I want to do. This tree is what I want to make. And you know, this tree's long since been sold. It's been years since it's been out of the collection. I don't even know what's happened to it. But this tree will always have a special place in my heart because it really did totally put a fork in the road of my life. So I was heading down a completely different direction. I was a stockbroker at the time working in finance and knew nothing of hard work or working out in the sun or anything like that. And so it was a big, big change in my life to go that direction. So a very, very important tree to me. This is also a very, very important tree to us Florida growers. This is the famous Jim Smith buttonwood. This is the best picture I could find of it. Unfortunately, a lot of his work, they're older photos, so I couldn't get one that was less blurry with it in leaf. Now, this tree was a massive tree. That's the other thing about pictures is they don't show how big these are. This tree was probably 1.5 meters wide by 1 meter tall. And this tree was probably equal, if not bigger than that. So massive, massive trees. This tree, unfortunately, if my understanding is correct, it did pass away, which is sad. So, you know, it does happen, unfortunately. But this was a very famous buttonwood created by Jim Smith. And now all I'm showing you now, this is just a gallery of the fun collected shapes that you'll see, some of the unique stuff. So this is something where, you know, that gin, a lot of us might be tempted to cut that off or cut it back shorter, and you could and still make a great bonsai tree. But there's just something about the fact that nature sculpted that, and it's unique and it's weird. And me and also Eric, we just like to keep that stuff, and we like to explore designing trees around it, you know. Sometimes I will kind of reduce and work on the deadwood, but more often than not, I'm really, really happy with just seeing the differences that these trees can take on, the different shapes. Now this is arguably the greatest collected buttonwood I've seen come out of Florida. This, Judy Gore, I think, owns this tree now. And this was one that when I met Eric, this had already gone through, I think, 3 or 4 owners. So this is what was called a legacy tree. It had actually outlived a few owners. And it was originally an upright. So it had been straight up and down when Eric got it, and he decided to turn it into a semi-cascade. But you guys can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I assume you can, but you can see this powerful live vein tracing and twisting and turning around this deadwood. And so you have to think and kind of explore in your mind how much time it would take for nature to create both the twists and turns and to create that live vein and the ribbon-like cross-section that that's creating. You know, it's not a round tree anymore. It's been living on one vein for so long, it's now growing in this flat ribbon-like shape. So that's a truly, truly amazing tree. And this is probably as old as some of those big buttonwoods we were looking at. You know, this is what I meant by adversity will slow a tree down big time. This is another cool one. This was actually originally owned by Jenny Boca, and this came into the nursery, and it's really, really weird. You know, it's not how I would necessarily style a tree that I'm growing from a seedling. But again, that's what's kind of cool about it is everyone is different. Every single one that comes out of the landscape is different. And so you can really see on this wood too, the age and the character of this wood. Let's go in a little closer. So look at that. That is old wood. You can't create that. You can't grow a tree in 4 years and make a gin out of it and have that kind of wood. It's not going to just rot that way. That's a lot of age and slow grain and a rough life that led to the look of that wood. Another really cool tree. I think this might have actually come out of Eric's old nursery out on Pine Island. I think this was one of those when they were clearing the land. And so you can see he did a really, really good job with it. But this one actually, surprisingly, the kind of outer shell of the wood looks really young, but it does have an inner core of some really old, interesting wood. Another really cool large buttonwood. Now this is probably originally a Mary Madison tree. We got these big ones from Lou Rayon over in Miami. And this is also like a meter across, if not bigger. So this is a big tree. Now this is another tree, another one of the amazing trees that's been in the nursery for years and years, and it just sold a couple weeks ago, so it's going to be shipping out soon. But this is a tree that has so much character. And at first, you know, this wasn't a tree when I first met Eric that I gravitated towards. It wasn't one that I was like, man, that's the coolest buttonwood I ever saw. It took a long time for me to really like look at this tree and start to piece together the story that it had. When we're assessing deadwood and we're looking at old deadwood, there's something that growers in Japan and Taiwan and higher level growers will refer to this little architecture here as a blade, a deadwood blade. That's when the deadwood gets thin and starts to emerge almost to like a knife point. And that happens, like I mentioned in the last slide, that happens when a tree lives on one or two life veins for so many years that it's thickening in only one direction or only thickening in two directions. And so you start to get a ribbon as opposed to a cylinder or a round cross section. So that's years and years and years that it took to make that little piece by piece, that little ribbon was made. So that's a very interesting story that this tree tells, not to mention the twists and the turns that it's taking on. So this was probably trampled on more times than we can count and just kept kind of growing back after all that. And this is my favorite buttonwood in the nursery currently. I couldn't find a less blurry photo of it. It defoliated, but Eric and I don't always agree with everything Eric does in bonsai. We do have some aesthetic differences on some things. But what I will say is Eric grows the absolute nicest buttonwoods I've ever seen anywhere. The best, the absolute tightest ramification, the smallest leaves. He's just, in my opinion, the buttonwood king. He does the best buttonwoods. So this was another one of those massive ones that we got from Lou Rayon. And Eric did all the branching here. So none of this existed. We just got trunks. So this is probably my favorite buttonwood in the nursery now, that since we've sold some of those crazier ones, and definitely an old survivor. Now this is a massive tree as well. This is probably bigger than the other ones I was saying, maybe 1.5 meters to 2 meters wide. And you guys can check this out next time you're out at the nursery. But a really, really cool tree. And you can see the character on the deadwood, very, very old, tight grained wood. So that's a real survivor there. Now this is one by Enrique Castaño down in Mexico. Now, when I went down in Mexico too, that was where I saw the absolute craziest material. So again, like I mentioned, we're at the northern part of the buttonwood range. So as you go further south, you will start to see crazier buttonwoods, and that's not as unique as it is here. You know, it's not as hard to find a crazy buttonwood in Mexico as it is here. They're all over the place. Same with Puerto Rico. You know, I'm not saying that every buttonwood in Puerto Rico is amazing, but they do have the landscape, they do kind of have the climate, they have everything you need to create a lot of cool trees. So what I want you guys to really hone in here is the design of the canopy. So note that everybody kind of designs the canopies different. So Eric likes to create pads and descend branches down, whereas if you look at Enrique, this is much more like a naturalistic kind of broadleaf design. Now this might be my favorite buttonwood that I've seen in all of the world so far. I haven't seen this in person, but This is by Jose Rodriguez down in Puerto Rico. And this is world-class bonsai. That'll compete. That buttonwood will compete with anything coming out of Taiwan, anything coming out of Indonesia. I mean, that is as good as it gets. That is a wild, wild survivor. So that's the kind of material, you know, I'd love to see more of. But even now, you know, even since the 80s to now, you don't see trees like that getting collected very often in Florida. You know, that's not very common. So this is kind of the holy grail here. So buttonwood styling tips. And does anybody have any questions right now? Everybody doing okay?
Where was the Jose Rodriguez? Is that a Puerto Rican or a Spanish or what?
Yeah, sorry. He's an artist in Puerto Rico. He's one of Pedro's students. So he was kind of like the Mike Lane for Pedro for many years. And so now he's, you know, building his name, and he's become a real dominant force with just styling tropical bonsai. He's really, really good with water jasmine, and in my opinion, has the coolest buttonwoods. So I'm a big, big fan of his work. I think he's really grown a lot as an artist. He's really good. So buttonwoods are prized for their deadwood over all other attributes. So these are just some styling tips. When we're going to approach our own buttonwoods at home, this hopefully will help you guys have an aesthetic to shoot for, okay? So buttonwoods are prized for their deadwood over all other attributes. And so typically artists defer to the driftwood style of bonsai often seen on juniper and pines. So if you go through the old books, like for instance, I have an old Charles Saronio book called Bonsai Styles of the World. And in that, and in a lot of the old like John Naka books, you'll read about these breakdowns and key points of the traditional Japanese styles. One of them is driftwood style. And that will give you a lot of key points on what you're looking for and what you want to highlight when you're working with deadwood trees. So those are the key points that I also apply to buttonwood. And I'm going to talk about that. I'm not going to just leave you guys hanging, but I do apply conifer theory to buttonwoods. So the same thing you see on junipers, that's exactly how I'm approaching my buttonwood as far as aesthetics go. No different. Nursery material can be wired while young, allowing twists, turns, and movement to be grown. So if I'm going to grow a buttonwood from a cutting, this is how I'm going to do it, just like I would a juniper. I'll take a small cutting and I'll wire it up and I'll twist it and I'll turn it in all directions. And more often than not, I don't even have in my mind's eye, I'm not deliberately making these turns like, oh, I want this one to curve this much this way and that much that way. It's an act of nature. I get it wired and I just shape it quick and fast, and I try to just be as random as I can. And that's how it all starts, because some of those twists are going to become deadwood on the design, and some of those twists are going to become the trunk line. Okay, so that's the first thing that's similar to junipers. As it ages and gets fat, once it gets to about an inch or 3/4 of an inch diameter, I'll start to put shari or lines of deadwood on the tree. So that's like what we saw where you see those strips that are kind of undulating around. We'll get into this and I'll show photos, but I split it into 2 life veins, having a shari to the front and one to the back to kind of start that process and start to get some character into the trunk while it's still young. Branches are also wired and twisted as they grow. As I said, some will become gin in the future. Collected material is held in a very high reverence and is approached with great respect. So when you are dealing with a collected tree, everything's about reverence. You should be approaching that with the idea that you are removing as little as possible to achieve your design. And you shouldn't be trying to put too much of this onto your collected tree, because in my opinion, that's not paying respect to that old survivor. Compromises must often be made to make the very most of collected material. I'm kicking a dead horse here now, but literally you're going to have to leave some stuff that would be a flaw on material we'd grow at home. You know, branches that are emerging from the back, or this trunk line crosses this trunk line, or some of that stuff you just can't care about. You've got to work with it and make the best out of the tree. As a personal aesthetic, I tend to descend branches in the manner of conifer styling and typically wire and shape pads in a similar manner. So that goes back to what I was just talking about with Enrique. So I don't know if you guys can see this small drawing in my little window. Can you guys see that okay? In my little window?
Yes.
So there's a broadleaf here, and then this would be like more of a conifer branching. And broadleaf is honestly what we see on oak trees, ficus trees, and that's more often an up and out kind of branch orientation, okay? Conifers we more often see as padded out, very strong leader branches. So the leader, there's usually a stronger branch mixed in there, not as up and out, definitely descending down and forming little pads of foliage. So this is how I structure buttonwoods, even though they're a broadleaf, because I think that the deadwood design, me personally, a personal aesthetic, I think it looks better and highlights better with that padded look. All right, so here's where we'll get into kind of some of the progressions that I have on here. So this was a $50 buttonwood. Now, what I like to show in a lot of to my students is I'm not a rich guy, you know, I'm not Ryan Neal. I can't go and buy a $12,000 tree. I'm working on the Honda Civics of bonsai. He's working on the Ferraris of bonsai. So what I buy $50 trees, and I try to show you guys how to make the very best out of material that we can all kind of acquire, you know. So this is a small buttonwood I got for $50 that Eric had already done the previous wiring on. You can see that the cutting has a lot of cool twists and turns, but other than that, there's nothing special about it. So this is what I mean by starting to prepare it for design. Now, this was in February, and I don't recommend you really messing with buttonwoods in February. They're incredibly weak through the winter. So when I purchased this tree, I still wanted to not let things grow that I didn't need. So all I did was kind of do a soft cutback and gin that one portion that I knew I was going to gin anyway. So get the energy moving into the direction I wanted it to. And then I put a shari on the front and on the back to start the process of dividing the two life veins. So I don't make a big shari. I just open up what I call little windows that later on I'll connect and extend and start to wean the tree off of having just a circular life vein. So there it is, a little up, a little closer. You can just see those small gouges here to the front that wraps around to here. And so that's actually the one on the back peeking out. Okay, so once we start getting into growing season and I start seeing the tree grow, I get a little more aggressive and I get rid of everything I'm not going to use. So I left a lot of that stuff for the health of the tree, but now it's gone. And so what I'm also going to show you is I'm going to denote that this started in February of 2018. So I'm going to show you what I achieved also in 1 year's time, okay? So I wired up one branch. I put a twist in it to match the twist that was in the trunk, and I wired that up to become the apex. I also wired another branch down and put a similar twist to match with the rest of the trunk and wired that to be my descending trunk line. Lime sulfur was also applied to bleach and protect the deadwood, though in reality, I didn't really need to do that. It was too young, like the wood's not gonna rot out in a year. I did it because it looks cool. That's the real reason. So the two wired branches are allowed to grow, and as they do, the twists are compressed. So when I put those really, really tight turns into my branches, some of you have seen some of my trees that have those really tight turns. I don't do it all at one time. I'll put as much as I can. I listen to the branch and I feel for it. And you'll hear these little tiny cracks. You'll hear it go. And once I start hearing that stuff, I stop and I'll leave it there for a week or two. And then I'll come back and I'll recompress the design until I hear those cracks again. And then I stop and I'll recompress it again a few weeks later until I have it right where I want it. The next thing I do is I don't prune that branch. I let it run until it gets to a thickness that looks appealing on the trunk. So I don't want my trunk to go from a fat trunk to this little piddly, skinny little branch. So I need to get some size on them before I start to prune them back. The other thing is you'll notice that the top branch is growing much faster than the bottom branch. Now, I just said I don't want to prune them because if I prune them, it's going to slow that top branch down from getting fatter. And so I need to slow it down in another way. so that I can move more of that energy to the bottom one. So what I do is I take leaves off of this guy. So I would cut this leaf, that leaf, that leaf, and this leaf, and weaken it only up to the tip so that this guy down here could start to catch up and grow more equal. Otherwise, if you leave him untouched for, you know, the whole year, then this guy will take all the energy and he won't do squat. So you do have to kind of balance them out. So after a while, after several months, you can see that the shari is rolling over nicely. Now, the theory in Japan with the shari is if you really wanted to grow like the highest level bonsai, they'll do this stuff in the nursery and they'll do shari work like every 1 to 2 years. And what they're hoping for is that the shari grows together. They want those two ends to come back and touch or nearly touch. And then they reopen them up. And what happens is as that live vein crawls across that dead wood, it's laying a new layer of lignified wood on top of it. So you're laying layer after layer, year after year, and then peeling it back out. And so what you're creating, you're simulating that dead wood that we see on collected material by creating these tight layers of wood over and over and over. So I do kind of experiment with that. I'm not as patient to let it close all the way on most things, and I wasn't on this guy, but I am getting more and more patient every year. So I'm going to get more into that kind of really letting it close up and reopen it and kind of see what kind of deadwood we can create that way. The other benefit is that you get a lot of texture. So if you're allowing more wood to create at a higher elevation at different points, then you start to get this texture to the deadwood that doesn't look as boring as this does. This is very, very flat with no detail to it. So boring life.
When you shari a branch, do you determine what's going to be the live vein yourself, or is there something specific on the tree branch itself that says you can cut here?
That is an absolutely fantastic question. That's a great question. And it's different. It's different based on young trees versus old trees. So what I'll say is that I used to have the same question, and I was so puzzled by that. And so what I found in growing trees is that the large trees, once they get old and they start muscling out, they'll show you where the live veins are. So as they're older, you'll be able to see. And all of that is that means that there was a point on the tree that grew very vigorously, faster than the other parts of the tree. And so it bulked up that section of the tree. And so you'll see you can still cut that live vein, but you typically don't, because that's going to be the strongest area of the tree. So you usually cut around that and make, you know, your shari into one of the recesses as opposed to one of the pronounced muscular areas. So you usually do try to follow the muscular areas. Now, with that said, when you're dealing with younger stock like I am on this, it's not as important to do that. Everything's kind of feeding homogeneously around the trunk. So you do have the choice to pick where you put it. Now, the guideline is this, the key point is you put one to the front and one to the back, and you divide the veins equally. So you should have an equal vein kind of riding the top of your design and an equal vein riding on the bottom of your design. And the reason they do that is you want to see the deadwood and you want to see the stretching of that ribbon-like thing. So if you're looking at it head on and you create the vein where you're looking at it and your shari's on top, then you won't see the character of it. It'll be blind to you. You know, you'll have to look at it from the top. Now, with that said, these key points that I tell you about, these rules, they're not like die hard, live and die by the sword. They're just there to help you out, to make a good tree. There's plenty of collected trees with one live vein and they look great, but if you're making 100 trees out of cuttings and you're looking for a theory to follow, then the theory to follow would be to keep one to the front, one to the back. I just think you'll make more often than not a more interesting tree that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you can experiment and put them in different areas and see how it works. I'll just tell you, sometimes it doesn't look good.
Okay.
Mike,
Yes, sir.
I have a, this actually might be somewhat extraneous. I've often wondered whether some particular roots of a tree feed particular branches of the tree, or do all of the roots feed the trunk and the tree then spreads out the water and minerals to wherever it
So-
wants.
So again, I think that's kind of that's a great question, by the way, but I do think that that's case by case scenario based on like what I was saying, where if a tree is too dominant on a certain vein and you do cut that vein, and it's, let's say you've got a giant root that's feeding 90% of the tree, and you cut that, then that root will die. It'll die all the way down to that root, and it'll kill that whole channel. But if you were to do it like slowly, if you were to chip away at it, then eventually it will find its way around. So it has to do, I guess, with how much moisture and how much energy is flowing through it at that time. Does that make sense? So like on a young guy like this, those roots are feeding all the way around. It really doesn't matter. It's not going to kill down to a specific root. But
Okay.
as they get bigger and as they become more dominant, then you'll start to see it kind of react more across the whole tree. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
It arose my mind because I was reading a Dan Robinson book, and he has really gnarly junipers, and they look a lot like this. And his theory was that certain roots feed certain branches. And I was intrigued by the idea, and I haven't been able to.
Well, and he's not wrong, but he's also talking about old trees, and that is true. So as they get old, they do become like they'll feed more on that vein that's closest to them usually. So like as that root sits right directly underneath the area that's growing very, very strongly, well, then they start to become more reliant on that strongest root. So they are tied in, but on young trees, they're feeding very homogeneously. There's no like definitive life vein going all the way around.
That may be the solution to my dilemma.
Cool. Oh, that's what we're here for. So this is where we hit almost the year mark. Okay, we're going to go a little further than that, but I wanted to show you what you can achieve in just a year's time with cheap material. So, and I didn't cut any corners, so I didn't have to make any trunk chops or create any big wounds or create any future work or problems for myself.
Mike, I'm sorry again. You mentioned they're weak in the winter, so you don't want to style them in the winter. What do you mean? Do you have some months that you choose to style these?
Great question. Yeah, great question. I do. So I treat these, you know how most people, we don't work our conifers in the summer. Most of the time we kind of leave our conifers alone in the summer. We might decandle a pine or two, but we're not doing hard styling on conifers in the middle of summer. It's kind of the opposite with buttonwoods. In winter, I don't touch them. I don't prune them. I don't really do anything unless it's going to make the tree more healthy. So if I have an area of the tree that's getting shaded out, I might thin an area above that to let more light in. But other than that, they grow so weak in the winter. So think of it as like a metabolism thing. This tree in the summer, you can't really do any wrong. You can water it however you want. You can prune it religiously. You can defoliate it. You can do a lot of that stuff. But come fall, towards the end, and we're entering into December, this thing's going to drop to like 0.5% of its water use that it was using. And with that, it's not going to recover from things as easily. So whereas we might have been able to get our leaves back, we might have been able to prune it and then 3 days later have a new shoot to prune in the summer. In the winter, when you prune it, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks to come back. So it's a much slower organism and it takes a lot longer to recover. And so if we're consistently insulting the plant by watering, so like for instance, a lot of people grow them in trays. If we're consistently inundating them through the winter, even though it's a buttonwood and it loves water, you will start to see that you're insulting it too much through the winter and you'll start to have issues. Even me, I have a tree right now out there that I didn't bring in because I didn't want to be embarrassed, but it stayed too wet through the winter. I should have repotted it and it held too wet through the winter. And now I'm losing some branches and I have a lot of issues on it. So they're not immune to those horticultural issues. It's just knowing, when you can do what. So in the wintertime, I really treat these guys as like the opposite of a conifer. I don't touch them. I leave them alone. And you'll notice your buttonwood wakes up. As you have them year after year after year, you'll be like, okay, we've hit April and it's still not growing. And it's growing very slow. Okay, we've hit May and it's still starting to grow, but still not strong. And then June will come around and that thing will go bananas and you'll be like, this is when I should do my work. this thing is so healthy. I should repot it now. I should do this. And so the tree will tell you when you should do your work. You know, that ultimately the tree, you want to do it when it's super, super healthy. Buttonwoods suffer a lot in the winter from branch dieback. And a lot of that is from watering. And I've really, really definitively pinned it down to that, because if you go out to Eric has the best buttonwoods, and his buttonwoods look great through the winter. They look great through the summer. And the difference between him and like me and some other growers is that he religiously checks water every single day. So even in the winter, he'll go and he'll scrape the soil on his buttonwood and he'll touch it and he'll say, all right, I'll check this again at noon. It still feels wet. I'll check back at noon. So, you know, I'm not saying we all have that luxury, but I'm just letting you know what the game is. You know, the game is that in the winter, we need to lighten up on the water, and we need to kind of start treating it not like it's an impervious plant to those kind of horticultural issues, because that can affect them for sure. And we'll get into more of that too, because I actually have a whole slide dedicated to that, but I do appreciate the question. That was very, very good.
How long can you let them dry out if you're not going to be keeping them in water?
Well, I do still water every day, but it's the amount of water. So what I'll usually do is once every 3 days or 2 days in the winter, I'll flood them out, like depending on how they look and how the soil looks. And I'll really, really give them a good watering. And then the rest of the time, if they still feel moist in the morning, I just kind of tap them a little bit on top, and I'll come back and I'll check them when I get home from work. But I'm guilty as charged. I mean, I have a buttonwood out there because I work and I can't always rely on checking my trees a second time through the day. I sometimes have to just say, you know what, I got to just water it. Sorry. So I'm not the Mr. Perfect watering guy either. I'm just telling you guys what the game is and what we should all be shooting for. You know, Eric's got it figured out. His buttonwoods are pristine always. So he's definitely got the watering down.
Last month, we talked about soil. When you're developing these trees, do you keep them in more organic soil?
Great, man. You guys got some awesome questions. Yes,
We're superb, you know.
well, you guys are. You really are asking the right questions. So soil, yes, I do grow in organic soil for development. But the main reason is this: it's cheap. It's cheap to grow them in. If I could afford to grow my trees and grow them in large pots with nothing but the finest Japanese ingredients, akadama and all that, then I would. But I can get good results with way cheaper soil and get a bulk of my work done, and then transfer it to the expensive stuff later on, and save myself some costs. So there are a lot of benefits to starting your transition earlier on and dealing with the slowdown earlier on. But cost kind of still wins out a lot of the time.
And they're kind of swampy trees, so they probably enjoy the organic soil too.
They are swampy, but still the best soil that I found that they grow in is, well, me personally, I grow them in the akadama lava pumice mix, and but Eric grows them in the coarsest mix you'll ever see. So I don't know if you guys use his coarse mix, but that's the same soil he uses on every tree. And Eric takes a different approach to soil science. So whereas I look at soil as, okay, I'm not going to be home all day, I need to think long and hard about water retention and what the tree wants and yada, yada, yada. Eric is all about checking the tree religiously, maybe multiple times a day, and also pruning to hit balance with the water loss. So he's growing everything in coarse mix, does not change his soil. So his buttonwoods in summer, they're not in drip trays or anything. They're growing in the coarsest mix possible in full sun, and he'll water them twice a day if he has to. And so, like I said, we're not all able to do that. So you do have to kind of choose whether that's going to be the best soil for you, but don't get too bogged down on the idea that these plants have to live in like a mucky component or anything, because they don't. They can thrive in a very, very coarse mix if you're watering them accordingly. So here on this guy, with the Shari nearly complete, this was 1 year later. There's just a little bit more to draw down on the trunk. And then my first set of secondary branches has already grown after pruning the 2 branches we were running. So because I spent all year running 2 branches, or close to a year running 2 branches, when I finally did decide to prune them, every other branch I needed on the design just popped out. It was basically like this pressure had built up in those branches from having so much stored energy from kind of just running all year, that finally being pruned back, they were like, oh, hey, I'll branch everywhere. Ding, 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 ding. And so I didn't have to fuss with that whole game that we used to play where it's like, well, I hope I get a left branch or I hope I get a right branch here if I cut back. I knew I was going to I'd get to choose. I'd get to pick out the best of the branches that came out. And that's the scenario we want. So this is an up close of the shari to the back with the nice rollover. And then this was it when I potted it. So you can see, this is interesting too, is right here. You can see this is where I started the window, was here and here. And then when I drew it down, you can see there's a small difference in texture and elevation here because this wood was left longer. You see how I'm saying, how you build your shari in stages and you can build interest into it. So you can also see that my descending branch, those twists that we put into it have really grown in and look appropriate. And those branches have almost gotten big enough to start adding shari onto those. So I did, I sharied those as well. This was it last summer. So we are past the year mark, but you can see we're reducing the leaves down really nice. We're building out a lot of density in the design. And the area here, I leave these the strongest because this low descending branch was weak. So any weak areas, don't ever treat your tree homogenously. Don't prune your tree, just go down the line and prune everything the same. Because I'm gonna just posit a question out there. Do you think that every branch on the tree grows at the same speed and strength? No. Not every branch will be at the same strength. If you look through any of your trees right now, you can go out when we finish this and look at your trees, and you'll notice that some branches look really weak and look like they're barely hanging in, and some branches look like they're kicking butt. And so if we prune the weak one the same way we prune the strong one, the weak one's going to die. It's not going to come back. And the strong one's going to be all you have left. Whereas if we just prune the strong one and don't touch the weak one, then the weak one will have some time to catch up and it won't be weak anymore. So
Isn't it particularly true in the Cascades that the lowest part of the branch is generally the weakest? Wouldn't that be because the cytokinins, the hormones don't really want to go down, they want to go up?
They want to go up, and also yeah, that's exactly right. They want to go up. So everything's always most plants want to aim up towards the sun and grow apically dominant. So that's going to be the same for a buttonwood. It wants to grow up. So when you're doing cascade designs, you do have to play with the vigor and sometimes weaken the top and let the bottom grow stronger so that you can balance them. The real name of the game on like high-end bonsai is balance. That's it. On refined trees is hitting it so that you shouldn't, throughout the growth season, it really shouldn't happen where you have a shoot out here and a shoot out here and a shoot out here, and then you go and you clip those shoots. And then a week later, you have a shoot out in another spot, a shoot out in another spot. A true refined tree, like if we were to go to Taiwan or Japan, they grow like this. Everything just slowly grows out because they're constantly going in there and balancing the vigor throughout the tree so that it's hitting a balance and growing like that. Okay.
Hey, Mike,
So
did you accidentally break your gin, or did you cut that?
You caught that, man. Damn. It actually blew off the bench. Yeah. So I was bummed, man. Blew off the bench when it was like a year into the design and snapped that little gin off. So I just left it as a little stub. But yeah, you caught that. That's pretty good. The other thing I want to touch on is the gin that was to the back. So you see here, there's this long gin, long straight gin. I decided to break it off very, very short because it wasn't super interesting. And all it did was perpetuate this straight line here. So your eye just sees a straight line behind the tree, and it just broke up the dynamic movement that I put into it with all the twists and turns. So decided to rely less on that and reduce that gin so we could highlight more of the twists and turns. And you can see here, I've put in shari on these branches and they had already healed up. So that's going to be cool when I reopen those. Those should have some cool texture. This was it this year, right before I did my shari work again. And so this is what I mean by secondary shari work. So I came in and I took these down where it was starting to creep close together. I took this ridge back down. And so the tree will grow out in this direction now and out in this direction. And this will continue to get wider after years and years of doing this. So over time, when I've had this tree for 7 or 8 years, I should hopefully have built out a nice little ribbon. And when I've had it for 10 to 15 years, it should look like some of those old junipers we've seen. Okay. So there's an up close of it as well. And then finally, I got to pot it in a nice Japanese pot this year. And I'm going to try and display it in a Shohin display at BSF this year. So, so after a couple of years with a $50 tree, I made something that I really like, really happy with it. And I'm confident enough to kind of show that on the state level. So
And that's sphagnum moss that it's in, isn't it?
yes. Yep. I'm a big fan. So that's the other thing is like, I do a lot of different stuff for Shohin than I do for big trees. All right. So like, you won't see me taking my big trees and putting big, you know, masses of sphagnum moss on top of them after repots or anything like that. But small trees, the horticulture is a nightmare. It is really, really difficult. You're dealing with a small soil mass. And so if you think of the size of soil mass, if you dry out 1 inch on a big pot, that's not a big deal. Who cares? But if you dry out 1 inch on a 3-inch pot, you know, now you're starting to affect the whole ecosystem of the roots. You know, that's not good. So we do need to kind of think outside the box and think like, okay, maybe I should err on the side of caution and keep my Shohin wetter and deal with overwatering issues rather than dealing with drying issues. Because drying issues was one of the biggest things that held me back in my initial kind of pursuit of Shohin. So good questions. Everybody doing okay? All right, cool. Okay, so this kind of touches on what we were saying before about watering, and we're going to get back into that. This is the buttonwood horticulture. So many people portray buttonwoods as true mangroves and as trees that grow directly in water. This is, however, a bit misleading. So I've been out in the mangrove swamps my entire life. Even before I got into bonsai, I was around buttonwoods all the time and didn't know it. I've always been a kayaker, always been big into barrier islands and fishing. And one of the things I'll tell you is you won't typically see buttonwoods growing directly in the water. And if you do, that's usually because the incoming tide or a flood, it's after a storm, it's wet season, it's a temporary thing. So buttonwoods can tolerate being submerged in water, and they can tolerate it for a good deal of time, especially in the warm months like summer, which is usually our wettest months. And it is true that they can often be found growing in the water. However, this is flooding or tidal movement, and so they are not inundated indefinitely. Like most trees, they thrive in well-draining moist soil. So let's talk about something that's similar, cypress trees. How many of you guys have seen cypress trees planted in somebody's yard, right? How do those trees look? They look like Christmas trees. Those things look beautiful. They look like they're living their best life. Now go look at the trees that are growing submerged in the swamp and tell me that that looks like that's growing as happy as the tree in somebody's yard. There's a difference between tolerating and thriving. Big difference. So just because a tree can tolerate something and will stick it out doesn't mean that it couldn't do better in better conditions. So there's a big argument amongst naturalists that say that one of the primary reasons that cypress grow in swamps isn't that they love swamps or that it wasn't that they evolved to love swamps. It was that they evolved to grow there because they were getting outcompeted by faster growing species and better growing soil. So there was other things, anywhere else they try to grow, they just get their butts whooped. So that's the theory with that. And so I still go back to the horticulture of, you know, seeing Eric never use the drip trace, seeing Eric use the coarse mix. I learned a lot about water management, managing your leaf mass, your foliage mass in relation to the pot. You know, there's a lot that's going on there. Now, also with that said, like I says here, I'm not an advocate of the drip trays or anything like that. But I will say is that there are a lot of growers who have success with that. There's growers all over Louisiana that grow their cypress in tubs of water all the time. There are a lot of people who grow their buttonwoods in tubs of water, and their buttonwoods look beautiful. I would argue that that's probably happening in the grow season. But, you know, there's some of this that we don't have all figured out. I can only tell you what I've pieced together anecdotally over my experience, what I've seen Eric do, and that he's just never had the need to do it. So that's what I know about the drip trays. So if you guys are comfortable using drip trays, don't go, rechanging your whole approach to Buttonwoods just because I said, oh, they don't like drip trays. If they're using the water and they're growing happy, keep doing what you're doing. If you're starting to have issues and the tree is declining, take it out of the drip tray, definitely. With that said, Buttonwood do prefer more moisture on average than most plants, and on refined trees may need watering twice a day during the warmest months to sustain all the growth. So it is true, like they do like more water, especially in the growing season, than other plants. So this next to a bougainvillea, I'm definitely going to water the Buttonwood more, but that doesn't mean that there's not a limit that can be reached. Winter is often where overwatering occurs as the tree's metabolism slows and water use drops considerably. Buttonwoods are tropical plants, and Florida is the northern end of their range, so winter protection at temperatures under 50 degrees is necessary. So when I say 50 degrees, I usually tell people that it's like a 3-part problem. If you leave your Buttonwood out in 50-degree temperatures, it's not going to kill the tree, but you will start to see a lot of leaf abnormalities. You'll start to see that the leaves harden off. They start turning a slight off color. You'll also notice you might get some orange leaves, and overall you just might not have the tree looking its best. Not a big deal. We wait it out and we wait for grow season. Now under that, once you start hitting like 45 degrees, that's when you can start losing some of your finer branching and where you can start causing damage to the Buttonwoods. And anything in the freezing range, anything in the 30s, you definitely need to protect the tree because it will kill big branches and possibly can kill the tree if the freeze is prolonged. So you do want to watch out for that, okay? Repotting should be done in the warmest months of summer and good aftercare followed. So Buttonwoods are scary to repot the first time. So when you're going from organic soil to your bonsai soil mix, the first thing you're going to notice is when you go to touch those roots, they all fall away. They're the most delicate, fleshiest roots ever. And so when we collect them, we don't collect any roots. It's not like a juniper where we're digging 6 feet out and trying to find the root ball. We just cut the trunk near the nabari and we take it, and we're hoping that there's enough stored energy in the tree to push lateral roots from those stubs and recover the tree. More often than not, that works. Now, where it becomes an issue is that if we go to repot the tree and we lose all those roots as we're going to bonsai mix, and then we don't follow really, really strict watering, you can lose the tree. So what I've gotten in the habit of doing, and what this has really worked, is treating it like a conifer. I do not bare root on the first potting. So the first potting, I break it down to a core. I do not defoliate on the first potting. I half cut every leaf and leave the terminal ends intact, the tips intact. And then I break it down to a core and I pot it into a perimeter of good bonsai soil. And then over the next few years, I'll go in and I'll dig out more and more of that core and replace it with bonsai mix. And I'll tell you, since I've been doing it that way, I haven't lost any of my Buttonwoods, haven't lost any of my students' Buttonwoods. It's been pretty safe process to do that. So I definitely stay away from bare rooting on first pots. Now, once you get it converted into bonsai soil, your subsequent repottings will be a piece of cake. You can reduce tons of roots on them, and as long as you still have a little core of feeder roots, they'll recover almost every time. So you can be really, really aggressive with them on all subsequent repottings. It's just that first repotting is where the most care needs to be taken, okay? Any questions on repotting or on horticulture or anything?
Can you talk quickly again about your defoliation on that first repot?
Yeah, good, awesome. Yeah, so the way I defoliate them is I will not do a 100% full defoliation. I half cut or 2/3 cut all the leaves. So I'm basically just trying to leave little tiny stubs of the leaf all along the tree. And then I leave the tips, the grow tips, intact. I do not prune it back at the same time anymore. Now, I'm not saying you can't do that. We've done it for years, and Eric will do that stuff too. A lot of times on refined trees, he'll just defoliate them and pot them. But me personally, especially dealing with students and dealing with people that can't check the watering as frequently as Eric can, I found that the leaving the core and not fully defoliating has saved a lot of issues. It keeps the tree stronger and it recovers quicker. So you're not weakening it as much by adding on to pruning it, full defoliation and whatnot. So it seems to keep it kind of active a little faster. Good question. All right. So we'll go ahead and skip. Oh, one more thing. So warmest months. So what I mean by that is there's some pros and cons. I used to tell people repot your buttonwoods in August, but what I found now, especially if it's the first potting, if it's your first potting, then you may want to do it earlier than August because they can sometimes pout after a repotting and need more than 2 weeks to recover. And so you might need to keep it in the shade for a month. And so what I don't want to happen is if we're in August and then we start, it lingers into the cooler months, well, then you're not going to have enough time to really recover the tree before winter comes, and you might have some issues down the road. So I like to do it as soon as we warm up and I start seeing the trees grow. So as soon as they're growing and I'm confident that, all right, that thing's growing way better than it was a month ago, that's when I would repot and then give it the longest period of recovery. All right. So here's a cool little collected buttonwood. This is one that I did collect, this guy. Just a neat little guy with a cool deadwood twist. And so this was kind of the first styling that I did to it. The left is kind of how it was presented to me. And all I did was wire a few branches and create one that was going to be a future gin. So one of those is going to be a future gin for us. This was a few months later. So you see, I haven't pruned it. It's not like I'm religiously pruning because I'm trying to build structure first. I'm a big advocate. Anybody who's seen my other programs or has come to one of my classes, I'm a big advocate of kind of the 3-step process of health, development, and refinement. So I go through a year or so where I'm building structure, I'm growing size to the branches, I'm trying to grow any of my heavy lifting. So anything I know that I'm going to need to do that I don't want the tree growing slow for, I do it. If I need to grow a big branch or heal a wound, I do it while the tree is in nursery soil or in a bigger pot, so I don't have to wait as long. So this is it running out. Now, as I said before, now it looks really, really shabby. It looked kind of cool there. It's nice and dense, but what happens is certain branches start taking too much energy. And you don't want to prune them yet because that, again, will divide them prematurely. And so what you have to do is leaf prune. And so it will look a little crummy while you're developing. But you're leaf pruning the ones that are getting too strong and then allowing those weak areas to kind of catch back up. All right. And this was also right after I repotted it into bonsai soil. So I went from there and I potted it over to the Akadama lava pumice mix. Come on. Now this is where things got good. So eventually, and you guys work to your comfort level, but I am very, very comfortable with the semi-clip and grow approach. I grow a lot of growth just to cut it off. And I don't waste it. I'll go ahead and I'll root anything that's wired and has a cool twist. I'll root that and make another tree out of it. But for the most part, all that growing out is just to increase diameter and set angles. So if you look, that branch, I didn't even have that branch to the top. I had to take something because I didn't get a great branch towards the top of the deadwood. I took something from the back of the design, looped it around, came up here, did another weird loop, and just built a lot of character that hopefully in the older ages of this tree will be really useful to build a cool bonsai. And this was it. This was it as it's starting to grow out. So I think this year it'll really start to kind of come in on its own. You can see this is where I made that gin. So this, if we go back, you can see this was a living piece of the tree that I intentionally grew out so that I could turn that into a gin. So I didn't rush it. I could have just the day I got the tree said, oh, I'm going to gin that one branch, but it wasn't interesting enough. It didn't have, it was just kind of a straight section that went in direct contrast to the rest of the tree. So I had to grow some character on it and, build some twist on it, add some texture to it, grow some of those little stubbies on it so it looked like it had been there longer. And then I finally killed it off and left a small sliver of this to grow as a vein to kind of keep that other side of the vein intact. So there it is after that treatment. So you can see kind of the nice descending twist that matches the rest of the tree. and we made good use of the collected material. And now this was another tree where it would have been easier, and it would have probably arguably made better taper if I would have just cut this here and went into one of the branches here. You know, I could have made a tighter tree, more compressed. But again, I go back to that theory of preserving what nature created. I want to save as much as I can. And there was a lot of deadwood and really cool live vein that came up and continued to grow in that direction. And I just couldn't bring myself to cut it back. So a couple more. So progression of another collected buttonwood. Now this one was a little expensive. This was $250. And this one was, I think, Puerto Rico buttonwood. And so this was how I brought it home day one. So you'll kind of see this one I didn't do in the winter either. So we can be pretty aggressive on this, this progression. So these are the two sides of it. One side's pretty interesting, make a nice short fat tree. That side's also pretty interesting. So I had to kind of thin it out to see where things were growing. But as I'm starting to cut back some of the redundant branching, I'm starting to see some more interest on the trunk, some more deadwood I didn't know was there. So we've got like this interesting, this whole section is a big deadwood shari that's kind of exists on the tree, and it kind of wraps around and does a hook back on itself like that I didn't even notice when I bought it. So there it is. Now you can see that kind of hook back. So I painted it with lime sulfur so you guys could see that a little bit better. And I really didn't keep a lot. I cut a lot of the tree back. You'll see here. That's what I kept day one. So honestly, initial stylings, it's going to behoove you to be more aggressive. We're not trying to grow 29 primary branches on a shohin. You usually need like one, or you usually need 2 or 3 primary branches, kind of build out the rest of the tree. One apex, one descending trunk, you know, a back branch, and you can kind of build the rest through ramification. So this was it as it was growing. Now, this thing had a hard repot. It did not like the repot. So this was it as it was starting to come back. It looked terrible. It just really wasn't growing vigorously. So I had to sit there and nurse this tree for a while before it came back. And one of the reasons why it struggled so much is it did suffer from nematodes. So these are collected trees. They come out of the ground and they can get nematodes. So the way I treated it is you can use nematicides like Nimitz. But buttonwoods we're going to get into also need avid. So usually when you're growing buttonwoods and you're pursuing growing buttonwoods, you'll need a pesticide or a miticide rather called avid. And avid also acts as a nematicide. So if you're going to use it anyway, and you will, you're going to need it, you can also use that as a nematicide. So I treated it a few times with that, soaking it in that, and it's been growing pretty good the last few years. I'll probably treat it again this year just to be sure, but it did recover and start to come back, which we'll obviously see. So this was it towards the winter of that year. You can see I'm still letting my descending line run out and get thicker, but we are starting to build some pretty good proportion, and we're starting to hone in on that cool twist that goes around the side of the tree. I did also.
Mike, can you explain the little black dots on the lime sulfur surfaces? There's black dots. Are those insect bites?
No, it's not insect. It's some kind of fungus, honestly, like a deadwood fungus that no matter what I do, I cannot get it off the deadwood. I've painted over it. It doesn't turn white. You know, I've brushed at it so many times, and it just seems like it's some kind of small fungus that's actually in the wood that I can't seem to get rid of. Doesn't seem to hurt anything or do anything bad. And I have seen it on other collected trees. But it's annoying because I can't even really cover it up well. So
I think it's kind of cool. It looks very natural.
Yeah. I mean, you'll see. I mean, when I paint it, it goes away a little bit, but it comes right back. So that's it when it's painted and you can't really see it, but it does come right back. Now, this was something that was driving me crazy. I'll show you guys real quick. So you see how long this was originally? I tried to work with it, but it kept obscuring my view of that twist back. So eventually, even there, I tried shortening it and seeing if that would work, and it still obscured my vision. So finally, I just kind of took it all the way back and kind of hollowed it out a little bit. And now we can kind of see it twisting around and see more of the character of the tree. So that was kind of how we finished out. This is where we're at now. So it's This one was a little slower than the other ones, but still a fun little tree.
Hey, Mike,
Yes, sir.
back to the nematodes. How did you determine that nematodes was your problem and not overwatering or soil nutrient issue?
So usually they'll present identically because a lot of times the nematodes will inhibit the root's ability to uptake water. So then the rest of the healthy roots will be inundated. And so that is kind of what you'll see. But what I had noticed was growths on the tree's roots. So I had actually seen it because I didn't bare root it on the first potting. I didn't notice it when I first went over to a bonsai pot. But then I was literally seeing these lumps start to come out of the roots that were exposed to the air. You know, I was starting to see these things coming out. And so I've seen nematodes so many times, I knew that's what I was dealing with. And so I started soaking it a couple times in the Avid solution. I looked up online. I don't remember what the ratio was, but there's a ratio that you'll mix like a little tub with Avid. And I soaked it in that for, I think, a few hours. And then I did that a few times. And I noticed after that, you won't see, it's not like the lumps will just disappear. You got to kind of cut them back. But you'll notice the horticulture of the tree changes dramatically. So once you kind of treat the nematodes, you'll start noticing the tree grows better. So that's, I assume I've treated it well, but when I go to repot this year, I'll see if it's still affecting healthy roots. Yeah.
I have a nematode problem on my cuttings of a Brazilian rain tree. Do you think the
Pain in the
Avid
ass.
drenching will work as well?
Yeah, the Avid works pretty good. Eric still uses Nimitz, but I'll tell you this, is nematodes is like one of those things that it almost seems like no matter what you use, you're gonna need continual treatments over a long period of time to really kill it 100%. So like I know our buttonwoods out at the nursery, we've probably treated those with Nimitz 3 or 4 times over the years. And you know, it finally seems like it's fully resolved, but it took a long time. And the way you'll check is every time you go to repot, you're like I said, you're not going to see the old lumps disappear. So you're looking at new root growth, and your new root growth, if it's showing no signs of nematode damage, then you're good. You can start cutting it back and starting to repair some of the ugly roots. But
I've had pretty good luck with, I had 3 Brazilian rain trees with nematodes, and with all 3 of them, if I really stripped the roots back and pulled
Yes.
a lot of roots off and then put them in almost entirely organic soil.
No, that's not, you're absolutely right. And that was
What I read was the nematodes really like alkaline soil.
Yeah, and a lot of people will use crab shell too. I mean, the crab shell supposedly works magic. Now, I don't have hard evidence for that. We don't have like years that we've used it, and we haven't like done checking up after using crab shell, but Eric has put crab shell around trees, and there's enough people and enough talk about it that, you know, it warrants looking into it. So that supposedly helps. Now, you're going to get tons of animals, I assume, if you're putting crushed crab around your tree, but it could work if you don't want to deal with all the chemicals. So the other thing that you said that was interesting was cutting all the roots back, and that can work. You can basically reset the tree. It's super risky, and we used to do that to our rain trees. Like when we first discovered nematodes as an issue back in like 2008, Jason was the one who first kind of researched it and discovered what to do. And what we did was we had some other pesticide, but we cut everything back, like cut every root off of it. And they were literally just like trunks with like little stubs of the Nabari. And most of them came back. We did have some die back on some, and it was still super scary to do that to some of those old rain trees, but it can work, and it did work on a lot of them. So, and it did stop the nematodes.
I did that at Eric's suggestion.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And that was Jason who found that out. So, all right. So pests and disease, this is where this is going to be really important as well. And this is key stuff. Buttonwoods are hardy. They're tough trees, but they do have a few pests that can cause them issues. The easiest one that you're going to deal with is mealybug. And I say mealybug haphazardly because there's a pest that attacks buttonwoods in the winter that neither Eric or I have fully identified. And he thinks it's a mealybug of some kind of small microscopic mealybug. But what you'll see in the wintertime is you'll see a black sooty mold developing around the petioles of your buttonwood leaves. And it's happened for the past 3 or 4 winters. I've seen it on them. and they will start to show damage, like they're getting attacked by pests. You'll start seeing that you're losing fine twigging, things like that. And so we spray them with Tall Star, and whatever it is, it seems to fix the issue. So it does seem to react to the pesticide. So that's easy. That one's not hard at all. Just in the winter, switch gears and start spraying with Tall Star. The next one's our biggest issue. This almost ruined Buttonwoods for me, and I didn't mess with them for years. The primary pest you're going to deal with Buttonwoods is chili thrip. So chili thrip is the bane of a buttonwood grower's existence. It does affect a lot of other plants, but chili thrip is a pest that really started making itself known in like 2010, 2011. And it has a cosmopolitan distribution now. So no matter where you're growing trees in the world, you can get chili thrip. Okay, it's everywhere. And it's a tough pest to kill. You won't see it. It is a microscopic pest. It's a small thrip that you need a magnifying or microscope to see. And all you'll see is the damage that it causes to your plant. And the first thing you'll see is like curling of the new growth. You'll see that it starts taking on a misshapen look. And the next thing you'll start to see as that leaf enlarges is these brown scarring on the underside of the leaf. It's called rasping. And that'll tell you that you've definitely got chili thrip. Now, I've tried to kill it with all sorts of things. I've tried tons of stuff, and I will promise you, you won't kill it with Bayer 3-in-1. I promise you, you won't kill it with Tall Star. The only things that I've really seen that affect it are strong miticides, like Avid. Avid is a strong miticide. It's an expensive miticide, but it really, really works well for killing chili thrip. And if you don't have a miticide, I can almost assure you, you won't have a long run with Buttonwoods, because whether it's this year or the next year, eventually the chili thrip will find your tree and it won't kill it outright. Chili thrip doesn't kill it outright. What it does is it feasts on new growth. So if you have a landscape tree and those leaves can harden off past the new growth, then you're fine. They're not going to eat the old growth. But in bonsai, we're always pruning the tree. We're keeping it tight. We're growing new growth all the time. And so there's times where we defoliate the tree and the whole tree is relying on new growth. So that's when things can really become an issue. And if we don't treat the pests, it'll just keep attacking new growth and weaken the tree, and then the tree will die. So it is something that you just got to get your head around. You got to treat them for chili thrip. And you don't have to use Avid. Avid is just the name brand. You could look for a generic that has the chemical, the active ingredient called abamectin. I should have wrote that down, but it's ABECTI. Wait, I think I'm off. Abamectin. And so there's another generic called Minx that has abamectin that I think is a little cheaper, so you could look into that. But that'll work really, really well. So this is our little devil. This is the guy we're fighting. So he's an evil little thrip, just like the same thing that attacks our ficus. So you know that causes that curly leaf, and we break them open and it has all the bugs inside. This is the same sort of critter. It's just a lot smaller and causes substantially more damage. And I couldn't find a better picture than this, but this is kind of what the buttonwood growth will look like when you see it emerging. It just has a lot of scarring to it. It's very contorted. And now this is when it's really, really bad. It obviously won't look that bad when it's first starting. So if you start to see any kind of misshapen leaves, you should start spraying with Avid.
I find that with the chili thrips, like you said, it starts with the new leaves, and I think it mainly on my ficus.
Yeah.
I think they like the nectar that's on the inside of the tree. But in any case, what I do is I pick them off and I put them in a plastic bag.
Sure.
Because if you throw them in the ground or throw them in your garbage, they continue to live.
Right.
Put them in a plastic bag, and I even spray Bayer's 3-in-1.
Sure. Now
but,
keep them.
But I spray it like 2 or 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah. So
Still come back.
So what I'll tell you is this, is chili thrip is different than that thrip. So that thrip is the typical ficus thrip, and that one is a much, he will react to Bayer 3-in-1 or Tall Star, the normal thrip. This thrip that affects buttonwoods, you won't even see it, and it won't curl the leaf over itself like the other one. You will literally be looking at your tree being like, why is this happening to my tree? And you won't see any pests on it. And so you'll just see scarring on the leaves. And so this is the one that I can't kill it with anything but a miticide. So I've tried it with everything else and it just doesn't resolve it. And I've even got another guy, I've got a customer down in Naples who owns his own landscaping business and has a giant buttonwood. And I've been telling him for 2 years to spray it with Avid. And he swears, he's like, listen, I spray it with this, I'm fine. It'll be okay. It'll be all right. And now we're 3 years in and he's finally coming around like, okay, I got to get the Avid. I'm like, okay, yeah. So he's tried everything. Yeah.
Mike, I've got to put on my public health hat here and
Okay.
talk like an old public health physician. Several agriculture extension services, Florida and Texas to be two, have indicated there's a real risk of the chili thrip becoming resistant to Avid or resistant to insecticides.
Yeah.
And they strongly recommend using at least 2 products.
I agree with that.
Alternating. Don't rely on just one, but use 2 different products, 2 different classes of miticide to prevent the resistance.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point. In practice, I should be better about that. It's hard to, buy 2 $80 miticides, but she's absolutely right. I mean, it is like an antibiotic, and if we're using it too often, then they can build resistance. The other thing that I'll talk about is proper treatment. Is if you don't kill them all. So if you spray one time, that's also really, really bad. You got to make sure that you kill them completely, and you've got to kill the life cycle. You got to kill the next set of babies before they lay eggs. So my usual spray regimen is, if I see just a small issue, I'll spray like one time. If it's just if I have a suspicion that I have Avid, I might spray one time. But if I see that I have damaged leaves and I know that I have chili thrip throughout the tree, then what I do is I spray every 5 days for 3 weeks. Okay. And I make sure that I break that life cycle. You have to, because if that life cycle exists or survives the pesticide, then you do have the chance of it acquiring an immunity to it. That can then have babies that then could have the mutation that helped them survive. So it is good to really eradicate them and make sure they're gone before you stop spraying. So,
I did find online someplace a list of
miticides
that have been proven effective.
Okay, cool.
And one of the ones I use, and I've been pretty successful, not on Buttonwood, but on Schefflera, it worked very well, is a product called Spinosad.
Oh yeah, Spinosad will work. Yeah, that's a good idea. I'm going to write that down too. So you said that did work good for you.
Yeah, again, not on a Buttonwood, but it cleared it up on Schefflera.
Did you try it on the Buttonwood?
I don't have a Buttonwood.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, I would assume that it would probably work as well, but that's the other thing too, guys, that I want to touch on before we go away from this is whenever you're trying something that is new to you or that is new to you've never sprayed it on a tree that you have in your garden, always start small first, because I can tell you, like Avid, I've used on every species we sell. I've used it in the sun. I've used it in the shade. I've done everything, and I've never damaged a tree with Avid. So I can safely recommend that. But whenever I'm going to recommend a chemical that I don't have a ton of experience with, or maybe I haven't sprayed that tree with it, you always want to test it on a small area first and see how it's going to react, because some things, I don't remember off the top of my head, but there was a big chemical issue. I think 7 or something, people were spraying it on Fukian teas and having issues with it. So I don't remember if it was 7, so don't quote me. But I do remember that certain pesticides can burn or harm other plants. So just be careful when you're trying new stuff, and just try it on a small area first, see how the plant reacts.
Judy, can you put on the chat the name of that product that you found?
Spinosad,
Certainly.
yeah.
It has the easy name of Captain Jack's dead bug. Is how I find it at the nursery.
And then Judy, could you also post up that list of miticides? That's probably real. If you have it. If you don't, then don't worry
I'll
about
find it again.
it. Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful information. So, any other questions on the pests?
Yeah, Mike, I have one.
Sure.
On using Avid, because I am using it on my Buttonwood, because you had seen, I mean, it looks fine. It's getting a lot. And I did the 3-week thing every 5 days, and now I'm spraying it like once a month. Do you think that the tree could get used to it? Like, should I switch off to one of these other ones, or?
I mean, ideally, yeah. It's you know, we all have to kind of balance what we can, how many pesticides we want to have, what we can afford. But in a perfect world, Judy's absolutely right. You should be, if we're being responsible growers, we should explore and find other miticides to rotate, because it's not going to work forever. I mean, that is a reality. One day the Avid won't work as good as it did, and it's the same thing. Like, look at flea medication. It's the same exact thing. Every couple of years, you have a new flea medication, and then they'll put the other one on the shelves that you can buy cheap, and it doesn't do anything. That's why they're selling it over the counter now. So it's the same sort of thing. Is it will build up the resistance. So if you can rotate it and you can kind of have more miticides, you know, like I said, I'm probably guilty of just honing in on what works, and I'm scared to try anything new because I don't want it to damage any plants. So I've just kind of been honed in on Avid. But Judy's right. I mean, you should really be having more and rotating through the various products. Yeah.
I have to ask a question. I have these
What's up, Mr. Jim?
white powdery bugs that chew holes all the way around the leaf of Buttonwoods.
Are those little beetles? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just that those will react to Tall Star. So you should be able to kill them with Tall Star. How you doing, Jim? Oh, you got to press the space bar.
Whoops, I'm doing fine.
I got hungry.
You have Tall Star.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So Tall Star will treat those beetles for you, and then what you could do too, if you don't even want to mess with Tall Star, is if we're proactive too, we can use a systemic like a metachloropid, and we can put that in at the beginning of the growth season. Like, think about when pests are going to be an issue. So a few weeks before spring, you can add that in and kind of stop the issues before they happen.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? So like Merit or whatever, the Bayer systemic, all that stuff's the same.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. No worries. Any other questions on that? Cool. Okay, so we're doing pretty good. Just got a few more that we're gonna get through, and then we'll have a nice break. Okay, so just got a few more slides. So this was another one of my Buttonwoods. This is the one behind me here, and this was actually a Mary Madison Buttonwood. As we all know, she collects the nicest Buttonwoods. She finds the nicest Buttonwoods, and I'm not immune to buying a Mary Madison Buttonwood. This was a very, very special tree. It was owned by Juan Andrade first. So he actually purchased it from her and did the initial styling. Juan Andrade and Seth Nelson are the two people that really in my last 4 or 5 years have really taught me a lot about kind of elevating some of the knowledge I already had. So this was one of the trees that I learned a lot on in regards to Buttonwoods. The key branches, just like we showed in the other progressions, were wired and then let to run out. They were let to run. And there's even one on here. This guy was intentionally set up to be a gin. So that's going to become a very, very important gin on the design. But he didn't just go for it right away. He had to get it thick and start to get character on the gin. You don't want a boring gin. One branch was intentionally grown to become the gin. That's what I just said. So this was it when it finally did get an initial styling. And then this portion, this was the branch that was being run out for gin here. And now that became a very nice counterbalance for the rest of the design. So we've got a lot of tension pulling us to the right, and it's nice to have something kind of pulling us a little bit to the left. So as I've had the tree, I haven't done anything too crazy with it, just kind of trying to build on what Juan has already started. So I've been kind of building it out, just building finer branching, more refining this tree than anything, as Juan had done a lot of the development work. But a very unique tree, very strong life vein, very old wood. So this is my favorite buttonwood. This is obviously my pride and joy buttonwood. That was it. This year, I did lose 2 key branches to the front here. Like, they're not big branches, but I've got kind of a hole in here now that this year I'm gonna have to fix. And that was from cutting back weak branches. So I had weak branches in that area. They weren't super strong, and I knew it in my head. I said, I really shouldn't prune these back now. And I did it anyway. And so I lost the whole branch set. And so now I got to regrow and fill in that gap. So it does have a little hole in the center currently. Okay. And then last thing, we're just going to go over a couple slides over narrow leaf buttonwood, also known as the card sound buttonwood. The exact taxonomy is of considerable debate. So why I say it's of considerable debate is, believe it or not, there hasn't been a ton of research done to buttonwoods. So there may be a lot more species of Conocarpus than we ever thought. There are Conocarpus growing in Africa, all over the place, that have very different foliage. And so I can't determine whether card sound buttonwood is one of these other species. There's also one that's called Conocarpus lancifolia. That's an emerging species that a lot of people are calling it. And so I can't tell if it's lancifolia. I can't tell if it's its own thing. There's not a lot of info on the taxonomy as far as that goes. So whether it's just a variety or a true species doesn't really affect us as bonsai growers. I just thought it was an interesting tidbit. So this form tends to grow foliage in tight clusters or whorls, similar to the needles of a pine or the leaves of a podocarpus. So really it looks very similar to a podocarpus. The other conspicuous feature is the long, narrow leaves, which are much different in size and shape to normal buttonwood trees. So they're way different. They're super skinny and about twice as long before pruning than a normal buttonwood. The fruit appears slightly smaller than standard buttonwood. And lastly, the narrow leaf is arguably less hardy than the standard buttonwood and can't be worked quite as aggressively. So it is a little more fussy than a normal buttonwood. They don't grow as fast or as vigorous, but they do tend to grow a lot denser, easier. So all other attributes are largely similar to the standard buttonwood, including pests, water, and care regimen. So they can still get chili thrip. They do still like moisture. They can still be overwatered in the winter. They do still hold deadwood. So here's kind of one that I did. This was another $50 tree from Eric's. And the way that I approach styling these guys, again, same as a conifer, no, not much different than my other buttonwoods, but I even hone in more and I treat them like a pine. So I wire them into these little tufts, and I'll actually place the tufts, you know, as you see here, to kind of make these little pads out of multiple tufts. So not a super impressive tree, you know, it's just a $50 tree, but Eric wanted me to explore the species and kind of learn how it grew. He's always been a big advocate of it, and I was always lukewarm on it. And so he was really insistent on me kind of trying it out and seeing. And it is a cool tree. I do like growing them, and I've even toyed with the idea of grafting this foliage on like a really cool trunk on a buttonwood and seeing how that goes. So who knows? But that's going to be the end of the PowerPoint section. Let me stop that. Are we done sharing? Okay, are we done sharing now? Okay, you guys can see me? All right, yay.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
You mentioned silver buttonwoods,
Mhm.
and I don't know if I've ever seen a silver buttonwood bonsai. Have you?
I have, absolutely. I had a student that had a really nice one. She just sold it, but it was an old, very refined one that Eric had made. And that was probably in a bonsai pot. I mean, we probably had it trained for 7 years or so. And then an interesting thing that you bring that up, hang on 1 second. Give me 2 seconds and I'll be right back.
We see a lot of silver buttonwoods on the side of the road.
Not bad.
Big
The
trees.
one buttonwood I didn't grab from the garden is the one I wanted to talk about. So this is that one, the cool little like hot rod guy. And what's interesting about him is he reverts back and forth between silver and green. So like you'll see his leaves currently are silver and he's got all the hairs and the trichomes on him. But if I cut him back, like once he starts growing vigorously, he'll push a lot of green leaves and he'll come out green. And then, you know, every year he'll revert back to the silver. And so they will go back and forth. And so I actually doubt that it's a true species. I think it's more of a mutation than anything. And I think there's a lot of buttonwoods that I have seen this where they kind of revert and go back and forth between being covered with the trichomes and then being green. So I don't know too much about it, but yeah, they make great bonsai if you can dig them out of the landscape, and they work great. I love them. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a buttonwood that I failed to repot in time last year before going into winter.
Sure.
And I think over winter I overwatered it, and it's I've lost a lot, I have a lot of dieback. Should I wait until it gets a little bit warmer before I repot it? And can I heavily cut a lot of roots back? It doesn't really need to be cut back a lot, but what's your recommendation on getting it back to some better health?
So I'm in the same boat. I've been kind of going back and forth with whether I should do an emergency repot and just do it now. In theory, you should be able to do it now, and it probably would be fine. But I'm still waiting until May. Like I'm waiting until I start seeing the vigor of the remaining branches kind of kick on, and I'll feel a lot more confident going in there and chopping it up. But I have done buttonwoods out of season. Like we've had to go do collection maintenance for people that, you know, we don't have another option to get back up there. And so we've had to do them out of season, like trees that are in bonsai pots already. And, you know, we've done them early in like April, we've done them in March, and they've done fine. It's just, if it's already weak, that's the one thing that's keeping me from doing it, is if it's already weak and I'm going to be doing it before it's starting to grow, I just worry that I might not exacerbate the issue. So what I would do is wait till May, wait until you start seeing it kick on, and then go ahead and get it out of that pot and break down, I'd say 2/3 of that root ball you could probably get away with, and then fill it with fresh soil and just focus for the first few months. Avoid styling it or anything, just focus on building vigor back into the tree. Yeah, like here's another thing, let me rephrase that. If there is anything strong on your repotting, thin that area more than like the area that's really, really weak currently. Okay. All right, cool. Cool. Anyone else? All right, yeah. So these are the trees that we have here that we kind of talked about in the program. So you guys can see this is that small little guy. There's the front there. And now I want you guys to see the top though, because that's really where you see that vein starting to form and how it's taking on that flat section. So you see how flat we've already got, it's only a few years in. And so that's really what we're looking for. And the Japanese refer to that as mizusui. And that's that ribbon-like cross section. So that's what we're looking for when we're trying to create a deadwood tree out of young material. Same exact process that we do with junipers. And then, you know, you build on that shari. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but let me line it up. Maybe not. There's like one of the branches you can see, there's a shari right in here that I've already got on the branch in there. So I'm going to descend it as many times as I can as things get thicker on the tree, and just keep adding interest into the design. All right. Let's see. This is my other guy that we were talking about. So I've been keeping him in this Japanese container, this Japanese training pot for a while. And so he's been 2 years now I've been working on this tree, and this is going to be the year where I finally pot him into an appropriate pot. So when I pot buttonwoods, there's a lot of different theories on these, and I haven't honed in exactly on anything that I'm concrete on. What I will say is that The general convention is unglazed pots, masculine unglazed pots. So like you look at this guy, he's in a drum pot, very, very masculine, unglazed, and that plays off of the masculine features of the rest of the tree. But I've also explored masculinity with color. So I'll come back to him in just a second. So because I like the idea that buttonwoods grow near water, and I do feel that, you know, tropical is a little less formal than more temperate bonsai, I was kind of toying with potting them in something that's still rugged. It's still a drum pot, and it still looks like it's got that ancient patina to it, but it does have some color to it, and it does have some ornateness to it. So I'm not necessarily locked in on you have to be in a unglazed pot. And if you talk to Eric, Eric will pot buttonwoods in like the flashiest shuho pots, and he goes crazy with that stuff. So you guys can largely kind of dictate your own aesthetic in that. I would just say as a traditionalist, the traditionalist in me would go unglazed pot, as masculine as possible. So my pot for this guy that I'm choosing is this guy. So this is going to be the pot that I choose for this guy here. So I think he's going to end up in this nice shallow drum pot. So again, we do want to highlight the masculine nature of the tree. We're not growing this thing for flowers, you know, so we really want it to be powerful and strong, is my opinion. The last other thing that I need to do on this guy and talk about is you will often get kind of sparse on these trees through winter as well. So any branches that maybe were getting too leggy, you'll start to lose some of those interior leaves, and they'll start looking bony. What I do every year, usually when they start to get like that, is I have to cut them back hard when the time is right. So once this guy is super healthy, these branches that have gotten kind of airy, I'm going to have to head them in pretty hard and get them to try and bud back on the wood behind it. And so that can be kind of risky, and that you can lose weak branches that way. So that's what I mean by don't hard prune a branch that's got like 2 leaves on it. Wait until it gets a little more vigor in it, then try cutting it back, and it should respond a little bit better.
You would do that this time of year, Mike?
I'm going to wait like 1 more month, I think. So I looked back last year and was looking at when I was doing certain work. And I always wait for the tree to tell me, like, especially with buttonwoods, because you will literally see a 180 on these trees. They will turn on and they'll start growing very, very vigorously. And you'll be like, this is what he meant. You'll see the same thing with bucetas. Like bucetas will kind of be dragging their butt until we get to May, sometimes June, and then it's like, whoa, I just got all my year's growth in 3 months. So it's they will go crazy once they get to that point. And so I've just learned over the years that why am I going to rush it when I know the best time is coming, and it's going to just make the whole process a lot easier. So I just wait. You could do it this time of year and probably be fine, but I just think, like, why even risk it, you know?
Thanks.
No worries. No worries. And then this guy. So this is my baby. Talk about my baby. And you guys can see how I lost those branches to the front. You see the big hole I have in my design now? So you do want to take care before you prune them back super hard like that. Now, in reality, it's not that big of an issue, because come growing season, this thing's going to grow so many branches that I will very easily rebuild that section of the tree. I'll very easily refill in that section. But the point is that I could have arguably avoided it at the get-go by just not cutting it back while it was weak, and also arguably maybe watering even a little bit better and not letting the branch get that weak. You see what I'm saying? So Eric does a lot of things different than I do. Eric full defoliates buttonwoods. He will fully defoliate them and he'll cut them back. And that terrifies me. But Eric is very, very good at checking water and at watering things accordingly. So he recovers the trees every single time. He may lose a few fine branches, but he grows them right back. So that's how he keeps his so dense year after year, is he's not afraid to cut those suckers back hard. And that's the same thing for us. If they start getting too leggy, you got to do something. So that's going to be my plan for this guy, is to rebuild that section. And then I'm probably going to give him a really good detail wiring now, because it's been a few years since he's had a really good detail wiring. So I'll get in there and really flesh him out. And hopefully this year, this tree will be approaching kind of what I have in my mind's eye. You know, it'll be approaching that maturity. And the last thing that I'm looking for is there's something that we often don't talk about in bonsai that is really, really important. And we only see that with old trees. And it's called mochikomi. So mochikomi is a principle in Japan that guides the aesthetics and the value of bonsai trees over there. What mochikomi is maturity of design. So no matter how cool you make this tree, this guy here, there's always, for now, going to be a difference between the age of the branches I've grown off the trunk and the age of the trunk itself. So those branches, one of the easiest ways to see it is that the whole trunk is covered in real gnarly bark, and the branches are cinnamon colored and smooth and don't have any bark. And so this tree lacks mochikomi. It doesn't look mature. It's immature. And mochikomi doesn't come in 2 years. It doesn't come in 3 years. It comes in many, many years. I have a handful of trees that have arguably mochikomi. I have another buttonwood out there, the one that's sick, but that was one of the first ones I ever styled. And that has, every branch has bark on it. Every branch has craggy bark on it. And so that looks like an old tree. That's not pretending to be an old tree. It's old and mature throughout the whole design. And so getting back to this guy behind me, my little baby back here, is those big primary branches that Juan set, you know, in 2017, when those get bark on them and when the primaries throughout the design get bark on them, this tree will really have the respect that it deserves. It will have the mochikomi and it will be a real old bonsai. So that's what I'm looking for. Any questions on that philosophy or on anything we talked about? No? All right, cool.
Thank you very much, Mike. We appreciate you coming and really enjoyed the talk. Excellent.
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah, if you guys, I do hope, I know we're all already into Buttonwoods, but for those of you who are maybe a little hesitant on getting involved in them, I fully recommend them. I mean, go for it. Just get the miticides, like, especially if Judy has that list of multiple miticides and you can find one that's cheaper. I mean, really, there's no reason not to get into this material. It's been my favorite tree to work on. And these are some of the trees that, as hard as I've made them sound, these have been some of the trees that have survived my harshest insults. So they've stuck with me through the years. Some of my oldest trees are still Buttonwoods. So I recommend them for beginners and advanced people alike. So with that said, thank you guys for having me today. If you do have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to go have a bathroom break.
Mike, thank you very much. We really
Thank you,
appreciate
Mike.
it. It was a great job.
Thank you, Mike.
No,
I'll see you
Thank you,
Thursday.
buddy.
see you, Mickey. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Sam. Thanks, everybody. It was
You're all
great
worth
seeing
the
all my
money.
friends.
Mike,
Oh,
can I
yeah,
get
man.
you?
What's that?
I said, you're worth the money.
Thanks, man.
Call, you're busy. I text, you're busy. I know you're a busy man, but I want to get you to my place.
Okay.
I do that.
Yeah, I called you. I did try to call you back. I left you a voicemail last weekend.
Okay, well, I don't think so, but.
All
okay.
right. Yeah. Hey, no, Jim, I'll call you right after this, okay?
All right, very good.
All right, Jim.
Thank you.
All right, I'll see you guys.
Thanks, Mike.
Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Mike.
Have a great day.